The wind on the Kansas prairie had a voice that winter. It howled like a warning, long before the snow has ever touched the ground. Most settlers feared the coming storms. One man prepared for them in a way no one could understand. In the summer of 1872, under a blazing sun in the Flint Hills of Kansas, a quiet immigrant named Victor Madsen did something that left his neighbors uneasy. Instead of raising a cabin toward the sky like every other homesteader, he dug deep into the earth. Day after day, he carved a massive pit into a gentle rise of prairie land. Dust clung to his clothes, and sweat ran down his face, yet he worked with calm determination. Neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering and shaking their heads. Some pitied him. Others mocked him. They believed the harsh prairie had broken his spirit, when why else would a man bury his own home? Victor was not a carpenter by trade. Back in Europe, he had built underground storage cellars, where temperature and stability meant survival. He understood something the others did not. The earth, when trusted, could protect life better than wood and nails ever could. If you enjoy stories of courage and quiet ingenuity from the American frontier, this journey will stay with you. Victor's wife, Eliza, watched with a mix of worry and faith. Their first winter on the prairie had been brutal. The wind had slipped through every crack of their small wooden shack. Frost formed inside the walls. Their children slept in layers of blankets, their breath visible in the freezing air. Firewood burned faster than they could gather it, and still the cold ruled their home. That winter changed Victor, and he realized the problem was not just the cold, it was how they were fighting it. By late summer, the pit was complete, deep, wide, and carefully shaped. Victor laid a strong stone foundation at the bottom. Thick cottonwood logs formed the frame of the cabin. But unlike traditional homes, these walls were not meant to face the wind. They were meant to be embraced by the earth. He shoveled soil back against the walls, packing it tightly. Layer by layer, the prairie reclaimed the structure. When the roof went on, he covered it with grass, sod, and thick soil. From a distance, the home disappeared into the landscape. Only a simple wooden front and a modest chimney revealed that a family lived there. To the neighbors, it looked like a burrow. To Victor, it was a shield. Autumn arrived with golden light and cool evenings. While others rushed to reinforce chinking and stack endless cords of firewood, Victor's preparations were nearly complete. Inside the earth-sheltered home, the air felt steady and calm. The temperature remained cool during warm days and comfortably mild at night. Eliza noticed the difference immediately. There were no drafts brushing against her neck, no sudden chills creeping across the floor. The silence was deeper too, as if the prairie itself was standing guard around them. Then winter came. At first, it was gentle. Frost painted the grass white at dawn. Thin snowfalls dusted the prairie. But by January, the sky darkened with a heaviness that seasoned settlers recognized with dread. Old-timers spoke in low voices about storms not seen in decades. One afternoon, the wind shifted sharply to the north. As the temperature plunged within hours, clouds swallowed the sun, and a blizzard unlike any in 40 years descended upon the prairie. The storm roared with terrifying force. Snow fell sideways, driven by relentless winds. Visibility vanished. Paths disappeared. Conventional cabins trembled under the assault. Walls groaned. Roofs leaked icy drafts. Families huddled close to their stoves, feeding them constantly, yet warmth seemed to slip away into the freezing night. Inside Victor's buried home, the storm felt distant. The thick earth surrounding the walls blocked the wind entirely. The temperature inside remained steady and gentle. The small stove needed only occasional tending. Eliza cooked warm meals without her hands stiffening from cold. Their children played comfortably on the floor, their laughter soft and untroubled. While chaos raged above, calm lived below. Midway through the storm's second week, a desperate knock echoed against their sturdy wooden door. Victor opened it to find Thomas Reed, a neighboring homesteader, half frozen and exhausted. His wagon had broken in the storm, and his cabin was miles away through blinding snow. Victor welcomed him without hesitation. As Thomas stepped inside, his expression shifted from pain to disbelief. He slowly removed his gloves, then his heavy coat. The warmth was steady, the air still, the silence profound. He watched Eliza knead bread near the stove, and his eyes widened as he noticed something remarkable. A bowl of dough sat on a shelf against the earthen wall. It was rising beautifully. In a world where water froze indoors and frost clung to blankets, the sight was almost miraculous. Thomas stared at it, then at Victor, understanding dawning in his eyes. The prairie had buried the cabin, but in doing so, it had protected life. Outside, the blizzard continued its fury, unaware that beneath a quiet mound of snow-covered earth, one family had found a way not just to survive the winter, but to live through it in peace. And as the storm raged on, word of the warm house beneath the prairie began its slow journey across the frozen plains, carried by those who had seen the impossible with their own eyes. The blizzard did not loosen its grip for many days. Snow piled high across the prairie, swallowing fences, wagons, and even the shapes of familiar hills. The wind screamed like a living thing, clawing at every exposed structure. Many families stayed confined to a single room, wrapped in blankets, feeding their stoves without rest, yet never feeling truly warm. Inside Victor Madsen's earth-sheltered home, time moved differently. The air remained calm and steady. The walls, packed tightly with earth, held a gentle warmth that never seemed to fade. Eliza moved about the home with quiet confidence, her hands steady as she prepared simple meals. The children read by lamplight, their cheeks rosy instead of pale from cold. The storm was real, but it felt distant, like thunder heard from deep within a valley. Thomas Reed, the neighbor Victor had rescued, stayed with them while the storm raged. Each day, his astonishment grew. He rose one morning, expecting the bitter chill he had known all his life on the prairie. Instead, he felt the same mild comfort that had greeted him the day before. And he walked to the front door and carefully opened it. A wall of snow stood before him, nearly reaching the top of the frame. The wind roared outside like a wild river. He quickly shut the door, his heart pounding. Then he turned back into the room, where the soft glow of lamplight and the smell of warm bread filled the air. He shook his head slowly, still struggling to understand. "It's like the storm doesn't exist in here," he said quietly. Victor gave a small nod. "The earth does not fight the storm," he replied. "It simply ignores it." Early in the story, you may have wondered how one simple idea could stand against the fury of nature. This was the answer taking shape before Thomas's eyes. Days passed, and the storm only intensified. Livestock across the prairie perished in the cold. Wooden cabins groaned under the weight of ice and snow. Smoke from chimneys thinned as firewood supplies dwindled. Fear settled heavily over the scattered homesteads. Inside the buried cabin, the rhythm of life remained steady. Victor carefully rationed their firewood, using far less than any of his neighbors would have needed. The stove burned low and calm, not in a desperate battle against the cold, but as a gentle partner to the warmth held by the earth. Eliza noticed something else. There was no dampness, no frost forming in corners, no icy draft slipping under doors. The walls stayed dry. Their clothes dried easily by the stove. Even during the harshest nights, the temperature inside barely changed. Thomas spent hours studying the structure. He touched the walls, pressed his ear against them, and observed the thickness of the sod-covered roof. He realized that the prairie itself had become a protective blanket. The earth absorbed the cold, slowed it, and kept it from invading the home. One evening, as the wind howled fiercely outside, Thomas sat with Victor near the stove. The lamplight flickered gently across their faces. "I called you foolish," Thomas admitted quietly. "I thought you were burying your family alive." Victor looked at the small flame in the stove before answering. "Sometimes the safest place is not where we can see the sky," he said softly. "Sometimes it is where the earth holds us steady." That night, the storm reached its peak. Winds roared at terrifying speeds, and temperatures plunged to deadly lows. Several cabins across the prairie suffered damage. Roofs collapsed. Doors froze shut. The families huddled in fear, unsure if their homes would withstand the night. Beneath the prairie, Victor's family slept peacefully. The thick layers of soil and sod acted like a massive shield. The wind could not penetrate. The cold could not rush in. The temperature inside remained calm and livable, as if the storm belonged to another world entirely. In the middle of the night, a faint, desperate pounding echoed at the door. Victor rose immediately, lantern in hand. When he opened the door, a blast of snow and wind surged inside. Standing there, barely visible through the swirling snow, was another neighbor, Samuel Carter, weak, shivering, and on the edge of collapse. Without hesitation, Victor and Thomas pulled him inside and closed the heavy door. Eliza wrapped Samuel in blankets and gave him warm broth. Within minutes, the color began to return to his face. His eyes slowly widened as he took in the warmth, the calm, and the quiet strength of the underground home. I thought no one could live through this," Samuel whispered. Victor gently replied, "We did not fight the storm. We stepped out of its path." Word of the buried cabin's safety spread quietly among those who survived the blizzard. When the storm finally began to weaken, after weeks of relentless fury, the prairie emerged scarred and silent. Snowdrifts towered like frozen waves. Many homes were damaged, and supplies were dangerously low. But on a gentle rise in the Flint Hills, a small mound of earth stood firm and unchanged. A thin trail of smoke rose steadily from its chimney, a quiet signal of endurance. In the days that followed, the neighbors came to see the remarkable shelter for themselves. They stepped inside with disbelief, feeling the steady warmth, the dry air, and the deep silence. What once seemed strange and foolish now appeared wise and life-saving. This moment became more than a story of survival. It became a lesson etched into the memory of the prairie, that sometimes true strength lies not in resisting nature, but in understanding it. As the snow slowly began to melt and the prairie prepared to breathe again, a quiet realization spread among the settlers. The future of survival on this harsh land might not stand tall against the wind. It might lie hidden beneath the grass, protected by the timeless strength of the earth. When the blizzard finally loosened its grip, the prairie looked like a different world. Snowdrifts stood like frozen waves. Fences vanished beneath white mounds, and the silence that followed the storm felt heavy and humbling. For many families, the aftermath brought loss of livestock, supplies, and in some cases, the homes they had worked so hard to build. But on a gentle rise in the Flint Hills, one small mound of earth stood untouched. Victor Madsen's buried cabin had endured the worst blizzard in 40 years without a single crack, draft, or moment of fear inside. The chimney still released a thin ribbon of smoke into the cold air, a quiet sign of warmth, life, and resilience. As the skies cleared and the sun returned, neighbors began making their way through the deep snow toward the mysterious earthen hill they had once mocked. Their boots crunched over the frozen crust as they approached the simple wooden front of the home. One by one, they knocked, not with doubt this time, but with respect. Victor opened the door with his usual calm expression. Warm air greeted each visitor, along with the comforting scent of fresh bread and wood smoke. Inside, the atmosphere was peaceful. The walls were dry. The temperature was steady. Eliza moved about with quiet grace, and the children smiled easily, untouched by the hardship that had gripped the prairie. Ormond Fitch, a practical and respected settler, stepped inside and slowly removed his hat. His eyes scanned every detail: the thick earthen walls, the sod-covered roof structure, the small stove that required so little wood, and the simple, efficient layout of the home. He paused at a small wooden shelf carved into the packed earth wall. On it sat a bowl of dough, rising steadily in the gentle warmth. Fitch stared at it in silence. And in his own cabin, water had frozen solid beside the hearth. Yet here, beneath the prairie, life continued as if winter had lost its power. He turned to Victor, his voice quiet and sincere. "I was wrong," he said. "You did not bury your home. You protected it." Victor gave a modest nod. "The earth has always known how to keep life safe," he replied. "We only needed to listen." In the weeks that followed, the story of the buried cabin spread across the county. It was not told as a tale of strange behavior, but as a story of wisdom, patience, and survival. Families spoke of the warm house under the prairie, of children who played in comfort while the storm raged, and of bread that rose in the dead of winter. Spring arrived slowly. Snow melted into the soil, and the prairie turned green once more. Yet with the thaw came a new sense of purpose among the settlers. They began to rethink how they built, how they prepared, and how they understood the land. Ormond Fitch was among the first to act. With humility and determination, he visited Victor and asked for guidance. Together, they walked the prairie, selecting a suitable rise in the land. Victor shared his knowledge step by step: how deep to dig, how thick to build the earthen walls, how to layer sod on the roof, and how to ensure proper drainage and airflow. Soon, the sound of shovels echoed across the prairie once again. But this time, they were not the sounds of desperation. They were the sounds of learning, adaptation, and hope. By the end of the summer, several new earth-sheltered homes dotted the landscape. From a distance, and they appeared as gentle green mounds blending into the prairie. Up close, they revealed sturdy doors, small windows, and chimneys rising with quiet confidence. These homes were not fighting the land. They were working with it. The transformation was not just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. The settlers no longer saw the prairie as an enemy to conquer. They began to see it as a partner, powerful, yes, but also generous to those who respected its rhythms. Victor remained a humble figure throughout it all. He did not seek recognition or praise. His satisfaction came from watching his neighbors' families live more comfortably and safely. Eliza often stood at the doorway of their earth-sheltered home, watching children from nearby homesteads play together in the open fields, their laughter carried by gentle prairie winds. Yet one evening, as the sun set in shades of gold and amber, Ormond Fitch stood beside Victor on the grassy rise above the buried cabin. They looked out over the prairie, now dotted with similar earth-covered homes. I used to think strength meant standing tall against the storm, Fitch said thoughtfully. Now I see it can also mean knowing when to take shelter in wisdom. Victor smiled softly. The land teaches those who are willing to learn, he replied. This story is not just about a buried cabin. It is about humility, resilience, and the quiet power of understanding nature rather than resisting it. In a world that often rewards force and speed, Victor's approach reminds us that patience, observation, and respect can be far more powerful. The worst blizzard in 40 years tested every homesteader on that prairie. Some survived by endurance, others survived by luck. But Victor Madsen and his family thrived because they chose a different path. One guided by knowledge, experience, and trust in the natural world. Their home beneath the prairie became a symbol of a deeper truth. Sometimes, the greatest protection comes not from standing above the storm, but from wisely stepping beyond its reach. As the years passed, the buried cabin remained a quiet landmark in the Flint Hills. Travelers would pause to hear the story. Children grew up knowing that true ingenuity often appears strange at first, but time reveals its brilliance. If this story of frontier wisdom and quiet strength touched your heart, remember that the past still holds lessons for our future. The courage to think differently, to respect nature, and to protect those we love is a legacy that never fades. Thank you for being part of this journey. If you found meaning in this story, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who appreciates the enduring spirit of the American frontier.